Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to Abnormal Voyages. My name is David, and today we find ourselves in Paducah, Kentucky. Everybody loves blankets, and here at the National Quilt Museum, they've taken that love and turned it into an art form. We're going to get in there and see what awesome quilts are waiting for us. Tag along.
We're going to a place that you've never heard of before. It's Abnormal Voyages. You're gonna learn something new. We're gonna open new doors. It's Abnormal Voyages.
Now, the first thing you have to do when entering the Quilt Museum is set aside any previous conceptions you may have about quilts. I promise you, whatever you think of when you think of the word quilt, this place will definitely turn that upside down. For most of the pieces in here, I was left completely awestruck that this was all done just with fabric. I mean, look at this one here. This looks like literally a photograph taken of a marketplace or department store with nice silk pillows in a row. It definitely doesn't look like something that somebody with some needle and thread was able to make. And no two quilts were the same. Some of them went a totally different direction and looked nice and futuristic like this one here. This looks like an enlarged microchip. Definitely not your average blanket, that's for sure. Now, the collection here at the Quilt Museum is massive, so much so that they can't have every single quilt out all the time, so they do change things out. But for the ones that aren't out, you can still see them in this awesome little book here. You can flip through and find all the quilts that happen to be in the collection, as well as a little bit about them, who made them, the year they were made, and then what was the thought and imagery behind it. You can also use this if you want to learn a little bit more about the ones that you see around you. Pretty neat resource. Something I quickly learned is that if you're good at making quilts, you definitely want to show it off, and these people did exactly that. This one here had a overlaying black concept, but then tons of different scraps of color and grays to really pop out of that blackness, and it comes together to make a pretty cool looking quilt. And then others took it a totally different direction and really leaned into the color aspect of things. This one has a beautiful pattern. You got some butterflies there in the middle, and then these plants all around the edges. But sometimes I didn't worry about having actual things, it was just the color. This one, I mean, it looks like a painting. Speaking of which, another one that definitely looked more like a painting than a quilt, this American flag. Like, this is gorgeous. I couldn't make this with all the art supplies in the world, much less needles and thread. And then, if I didn't know any better, I would have almost guessed that this one was a photograph, not even a drawing. So seeing it here, absolutely incredible. This level of talent is mind-blowing. And even ones that don't necessarily have a cohesive picture, you can still tell that the pattern took a whole lot of thought and work to put together to make into one quilt piece. Like a lot of art, several quilts have imagery and different meanings behind the pieces that are used in them. Me personally, I am a huge fan of the Beatles, so when I found out they had a big Beatles quilt here, I definitely had to see it. This is it behind us, and they've actually given us a little packet here that has all the information about what each little piece symbolizes, what song it references. We're going to check that out, and I'm going to explain to you what some of these pieces are. The way this was laid out is that each square represented a different album of the Beatles' discography. So in those individual squares, you could find different references to songs from that particular album. For example, this square represents Abbey Road, and inside it you can find, very obviously, Octopus's Garden, but also references to Maxwell's Silver Hammer, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and Carry That Weight. Some squares have other things in them besides the albums, such as here we have the UK with a heart over where Liverpool is. That's of course where the Beatles are from. Yellow Submarine was a very obvious one there. And then all together, they are surrounding this giant apple tree, which represents their company where they did their recordings, Apple Studios. And then at the very top, it has the Beatles with 1962 to 1970, the years they were active together as a group. Altogether, a very awesome quilt. The museum is lucky enough to have traveling collections that come through and will set up for a short amount of time so that people get to see that. This room is right now home to a whole gallery full of Australian-made quilts. Let's check them out. Quilting can be dated back to 3400 BC, so it's no big surprise that it's made its way all around the world. These quilts had a little bit more of a natural quality to them, like this one here showing just a bunch of feathers, and then next to it was a whole map of bird migration, but it looked like something that you might find in an old tomb, or considering it's Australia, probably out in the outback somewhere with Aboriginal tribes and such making these. Either way, they looked very, very cool. And then you moved on to where they had some larger pieces that all took advantage of the different colors and just made some beautiful patterns. These looked a little more like traditional quilts, but nevertheless, definitely still took a lot of time and talent to bring these to life. And even if they're more simple looking than the ones that are intricate pictures, they still have a really good mastery of color in some of these. This one here definitely stood out to me, and in a way it almost looks like this was done with colored pencils. Kind of the same as this next one, which had some gorgeous gradient work going on, with the colors flowing one into another and really making just something mesmerizing that you could sit and stare at for hours. Moving back into the main gallery, we see a couple of quilts that decided to go much plainer when it came to the color, and instead really focus on detail work. From the outset, this one doesn't look very special, but once you zoom in, you see that there's a whole intricate world that's stitched into the fabric of this quilt. Really cool. And then literally popping out of the quilt with these 3D fixtures at the bottom. This one is mainly black and white with just a few color accents in there. Really stands out, really gives you that modern art vibe. After the black and white, they hit you with a literal explosion of color. This looks like a supernova went off almost, and just threw the rainbow all over the place. Very kind of 60s tie-dye looking in my opinion. I really like this one. And moving on from that, we get kind of a story quilt of sorts. This is kind of similar to that Beatle one that we saw a little bit ago. And in this one, people would make different squares representing times of their life or maybe a story they wanted to tell, and then were able to weave them together into this pattern to make it a whole cohesive quilt. Using this format, even if they look similar, you can have some drastically different quilts. Like here, they clearly decided to go with just a few colors to have a theme going throughout their story. And then one went kind of educational, and this massive quilt is actually the ABCs. It goes from A to Z, with each square representing something that starts with that letter, such as the F for flag, the G for gingerbread, the C for cat, all the way down where we see P for pineapple, U for umbrella, Y for yacht, X for x-ray. Lots of very clever little Easter eggs in here. This would look really cool maybe at a school or something like that. Then we have a very contrasting piece here with the 3D colored blocks springing to life out of the black and white. You could really look at this from any angle you wanted to, and you would still get that really neat 3D effect. This leads us into my two favorite ones of the entire museum. First, we have this gorgeous scene here with all of the boats docked there in this city, and you have the reflections in the water. Again, this looks like a painting. And then, my all-time favorite,
the Puffin Mountain. This is just such an adorable picture. All of these colorful, happy puffins all hanging out together, having a great time. This, I would literally hang this in my house without any problem at all.
I don't know about you, but this museum has blown me away. I think it definitely proves art can be not only stylish, but comfy. Well, that's all the time we have for today. My name is David, and this has been Abnormal Voyages. Thanks for tagging along. We'll see you in the next one.